Hi, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. We are here for another community campfire with Hung Lee and Carrie Turner. So, here is a little introduction to today's conversation. In the face of imminent disaster and planetary collapse, we can no longer deny that the narrative running the show has become obsolete. This monoculture, designed around an economic narrative, has put a price tag on every aspect of life, from affection to attention, healthcare to education, ecology to environment, and even creativity. Organizations entrapped by this narrative have turned into profit making, productivity enhancing machines. To disentangle themselves from this trap of a single story, organizations have to reimagine their foundational narratives. In this conversation, let us collectively do that reimagining. What would organizational processes look like in a reimagined world where organizations are thriving communities of committed individuals gathered around a shared purpose? How would such organizations recruit and retain, learn and lead? What would the processes and operating systems be like? What would be the paradigm shifting changes? Let's explore in today's conversation, and we welcome your voices. Thank you.
Thank you for setting up so beautifully as always, Shahana. And let's bring on the main guest, the Mr. Hung Lee. Welcome to the exploration, mate. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, well, look, as we get going, let's maybe just start with a bit of an intro. For those that know you, big community builder yourself. So I think there's quite an alignment with where Shahana opened. But just give us a 60-second lowdown, Hung, what you're working on at the moment, a bit about you.
Yeah, so basically, I am a recruiter at heart. I started being a recruiter, I think, in 2000, and since then, I've kind of worked to build recruiting communities. So connecting people who care about the hiring and company building together in a global community via a newsletter, via podcast, via online spaces, and that kind of stuff. So I'm the person that basically tries to make sure that community is healthy and growing. That's it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for that. And the reason we were so keen to get you on, Hung, is I'm a little bit of a fanboy of Hung. I like him as a human being, but I always come back to him, Shahana, about his anthropology background. Such an interesting character that we've got with us today. And I'm really curious, maybe Shahana will, what we like to do, Hung, on here is just do a quick round to check in. What is it about this topic that particularly piques our interest? So Shahana, maybe we'll go to you first, then go to Hung, then go to me, and then following that check-in, we'll go exploring for half an hour.
Yeah, okay. So, for me, and I've been in the organizational space for more than 18 years till I left to set up as a solopreneur and kind of explore the future of leadership, future of work, future of me, and who I am becoming and who I am. So, in that process, some of the things that strike me today uh, after explorations and in multiple dialogues with people across the globe, with people like you, Gary, with Hung, what is coming across is that organizations today, in spite of digital technology, Uber technology, if you will, with AI and machine learning and whatnot, we are still functioning fundamentally on the old paradigms. It has been enhanced, of course, with all of this technological, platform capitalism and all of those shiny stuff. But we are still, the fundamental paradigms are still the same: profit making, productivity machines. And what I feel, at least, and in my experience, this has led to is we are still doing the organization processes in the way they were always done. Only we are using more technology to kind of enhance that, but we're enhancing the wrong things. And what I mean is, we are still looking at job descriptions, which resembles something I saw 20 years ago. We are still looking at ATS systems, which still resemble the skills and paradigms of the past. But we are looking at organizations of the future while we are looking at skill sets of the past. And how do we hope to step into a regenerative, forget regenerative, even a hopeful future with organizations still hanging on to the old skills and old mindsets and old ways of doing and being and leading and learning? Yeah, I could go on. I'm really passionate about this, but Gary, and I've shared this frustration with you. I tried floating my CV for various reasons. None of the ATS will ever pick up my CV. My skills don't. I do believe I have some skills. I'm very proud of them, but they don't feature in any ATS system ever, I think. And so, what is happening is, I think fundamentally, technology is exacerbating problems that exist instead of really going deep and reimagining the narrative and reimagining what organizations can be. So, we are not using technology to reinvent organizations, we are using technology to empower the old paradigms and do the wrong things even better and faster and all of that. Okay, I'm done with my rant.
By the way, just to lay it up like Hunk, this is not anti-recruitment. Just to put it out there, this
No,
is about narratives and structure. So yeah, over to you, mate.
I didn't hear that as a negative at all, and I sort of resonate a great deal with it. So I think what Sahana said is broadly correct. I mean, I'm very much aligned with the idea that a lot of the processes that we are currently using and getting more efficient at are actually really quite old systems of behaving. It goes back to, the Fordian management style. It goes back to, productivity itself is a Fordian metric. The idea that, what is productivity? What do we mean by this? It means that maximum amount of output per person per minute per person, and that's the focus. That's the purpose of the business, and of course the consequence of that is that the human beings that are part of that are doing this work are kind of getting crushed. So I think how I would understand this conversation is really the tension between what is the economic logic of the system that we're in, with what I call the social logic. Whether things are social, are they logical at all, I don't know. But there's certain things humanity needs from society, and there's certain things the economic machine needs to feed itself, and those things are not always aligned, and sometimes in significant tension. And if we contextualize this in terms of the environment and the ecology that we're all in existence with, then that tension may in fact be existential. So for sure, we need to investigate new ways. The only kind of, I wouldn't say criticism, but the area where I might diverge a little bit from Sahana is I believe that technology may be too broad a term to describe. I think absolutely the vast majority of the application of technology is to make the whole system more efficient. But I am deeply encouraged by a lot of technology driven innovation that is trying to reinvent the new. So, for instance, a lot of the new ways in which we are working are based on decentralized technology, open source technology, blockchain. Those types of things are very technological, but they're feeding back into cultural practices. So as culture changes technology, technology changes culture, and I can see some optimism in that flow. Although I would say that the question that we have to kind of address is, do we try and change the existing system, which will of course resist that change, or do we create a parallel system and hope that the old system atrophies away? That I see is the fork in the road a couple of years down the road, that we have to, I guess, each individually make that decision.
Oh, I'm so excited already. What two brilliant seeds. Thank you, mate. I'm of course Mr. Gary. I'm going to come in and go like, yeah, let's stitch those two things together. So my big thing with this, right, still working in the chemicals industry, one of the most extractive, toxic, if you want to look at the impact on the planet, right? However, all of these chemicals go into everything that we touch. We're using the technology. You can't get away from it, right? So there is this entanglement, right, of everything. And I think where we're at for me, and I'm really curious with this conversation, is I go to mindsets, Hung and Sahana. Like, are we even willing to interrogate our stories and our beliefs that we've been actually conditioned with since day dot as part of this reimagining, right? If whether we try and change the system as it is, whether we try and reimagine anew. I always think about Buckminster Fuller's quotes, my favorite one, right? Don't try and change the existing system, make a new system that makes the old one obsolete. I do think that's where we're going. I think I genuinely believe that it needs these types of conversations for us to just push beyond the comfort of the current system, like whether it's technology based, whether it's human based, whether it's a combination. What I'm not seeing in a corporate structure, including my own one, there's so much awareness of where we are at this moment in time, but so much fear and paralysis to speak up and challenge and to come up with a new idea. And that tension, I'm wondering how that fits in. And it's just Gary's lens, but I see it a lot. I'm just really curious about this sort of technology, human, creating the conditions that allow people to challenge safely. It comes into inclusion, right? So it's just, there's so many different circles and weaves around all this. And I'm wondering there's never going to be an optimum. There's going to be multiple ways forward. But like, how do we ensure that we keep challenging, podding, proking, co-creating the systems that will serve more of life and not just half a dozen people at the top of organizations, which is currently the current structure, right? So there's quite a lot in there, but let's go open flow. Feel free, Hung, to jump in, or Sahana. They're the things that are on my heart and mind as we go exploring today.
I think let me the question on evolution or revolution is always on my mind. And I'll say on the record that fundamentally I'm an anti-revolutionist, simply because I think the switching costs are really quite incredibly hard. And if you just study revolutionary change of any type, it seems that it cannot occur without atrocity. The systemic collapse basically creates a huge amount of damage, and I don't think that it's responsible to promote it. So then we go back to evolutionary change, but evolutionary change, we get compromised. So the people who are most able to change things internally are people that have had success under the old paradigm. And it's very difficult to ask people who have had success in the old way of working to suddenly change the new way of working. This is why incumbents can't innovate. It's not because they lack any genius. It's because the incentives to disrupt themselves is non-existent. You have to step outside in order to do that. And I dare say that all three of us have kind of done that in our own way. I mean, Sahana, you've done it by, stepping into your own solopreneur path. That's the path I've also followed. Gary, you're kind of parallel processing, I have to say. So, currently in employment, but now doing a lot of work in parallel, the two parts not necessarily always in connection. So there's ways in which we're exploring, but I think the fundamentals remain very, very challenging. I do think the parallel process might be the way forward. We just got to spend more time building the new and less time maintaining the old, and worry less about revolutionary change, because I think that can just be devastating. Even though, if we take the humanity out of it and just look at it purely with a very cold, hard lens, it may be that is the fastest way to get there, is through that incredibly destructive action. But I can't imagine myself ever endorsing it, I'm afraid to say. So yeah.
Just to add to what Hung was saying, two things. One is that parallel structure, So there is a concept called parallel structure, which, for example, just as examples, the slow food movement, which came up a few years ago. They were trying to, not that it took off all over the globe, but they were trying to come up with a parallel structure while certain functions still existed within the main narrative, still running the show. As with, say, nonviolent communication, again, a different way of communicating, even though so it's not revolutionary in that sense. It's more like the old one is still existing. The monoculture of economic paradigm still exists. But what we are missing out on, and as an anthropologist, Hong will explain this way better, what we are missing out on is the multiple diverse stories that are also needed to encapsulate, or to hold the wholeness of humanity. What we currently have, or we are running this whole show on, is just one aspect of life, which has ended up with us price tagging everything from our attention to affection, like I say. And there is a price tag and an opportunity cost for everything that you do. You want to have a baby, what is the opportunity cost? You want to do, I don't know, an MBA, then what are you losing out on? So there's this constant measure for, if you are saving a forest, because it you are saving so many $1 billion in XYZ, not because the forest exists on this planet and we are a part of this planet, not because we are an interconnected part of nature. Nature is not out there and we here observing nature objectively. So I think while the economic paradigm will continue to exist, it's just one facet of life. It will continue to exist and it needs to, but it's just one facet. As long as we don't see it as the driving narrative running the show, but there are these other ways of being and living in other paradigms, that becomes just another part. It doesn't then take center stage and drive us berserk the way it's doing now. And that is where I guess, Hung, I'm saying that revolution, not revolution, but how do we build these parallel structures within organizations, in different processes within workplaces, within leadership, within learning, within HR recruitment, within whatever we have to do within a workplace? What are different ways of doing it without losing the sight of the fact that yes, businesses need to make profit?
The optimism has come back to me now, because just hearing you say, Sahana, because the truth is, I think we are incrementally getting there. I mean, if we like, technology here is an assist, because I think all of us, if you don't mind me saying, are probably old enough to remember the world just about pre-internet, right? Now, in that sort of world, it was actually very difficult to connect with anybody outside of your employer. So the barrier between the company that you work for and the wider outside world was actually quite strong. You definitely didn't interact with competitors, for instance. Right? I mean, I remember back in my recruitment agency days, I would say I didn't know a single person that worked for another recruitment agency on a personal level. They were the enemy. We did not talk to them at all. Yet now, with the rise of the internet, rise of communication, the barriers, the discretion between organizations, I think, has become far less discreet. We've become more permeable. We can flow, information flows out of the business more easily. It flows in more easily. And maybe that's a possible future for us, because we now are able to create these parallel relationships with peer group members where there isn't necessarily an immediate profit motive. So for instance, right now, I know many thousands of recruiters, I would say. The vast majority of them, there's zero commercial relationship. But we are working, sharing, often very freely, on a lot of things without any agenda, without any purpose, other than to say this is a good thing to do. So I think that we can maybe have some optimism. Certainly, I've talked myself into being more optimistic through the course of this conversation, where technology is unlocking those doors a little bit and freeing the individual. This is not coming from company instruction, by the way, right? No organization. Gary, I hope you don't mind me citing you as an example, but you work for a big chemical organization. I'm sure it's a huge hierarchical structure. But at no point did your boss cascade down, hey, Gary, I want you to do this stuff like totally off the plan. No, but you are able to do it because you had access to this consumer technology that could still perform these functions. So I think there's optimism there. Maybe we're already demonstrating it by doing something like this call,
Yeah.
So good. And I'm feeling optimistic again. Hey, this is good. This is a good this is a good Tuesday. Joking apart though, right? I think this is important because it's there's a culture pattern, right, called right to comfort, which we all want, right? We're human beings. We like to feel comfortable, but there's something about, and I think we're modeling it in this call so far. This conversation is the ability to stare at and interrogate where we are, where we could be going, without sort of retrenching and going, my way's the right way, binary, left, right. Right. And I just want to point that out. I think that's a really helpful pattern to observe, because what I see quite a lot in the workplace and beyond is, look outside. I follow you on Twitter. Like the amount of polarization is crazy, right? Who's trying to tell you a story to go left or right? Like it's probably the loudest I've ever seen it in my life. So the ability to actually just have a dialogue like this and hold those different perspectives, not go down any one way or the other, and go right. Because maybe you can speak about the plural nature of all this, Sahana, again, because we are talking about recruitment, we are talking about retention. I'm really curious, like, to what extent are multiple perspectives like invited around recruitment, attraction, development, and retention? Are multiple perspectives valued, or is it actually we've got to keep busy, we've got to get the job done, we've got 1,000 people to recruit, like that's the only thing that matters? So I'm really curious what our thoughts might be around that. How do we hold those more diverse perspectives while still getting the job done?
I think Sahana's frozen.
Am I? Yeah. Can you all hear me? Is that?
Yeah, or maybe you were just pausing. I don't know, Sahana.
Oh, okay. No. I was just going to say I'd love to hear what Hung thinks.
Yeah. Well, firstly, having diversity, a multiplicity of voices is something that we say we like to hear. We it's a stated preference to say, of course, let's have a diversity of voices. But the true test of our commitment to that is when we encounter voices that are very challenging to our own preconceptions, and whether we would tolerate those voices. And of course, there's always a line beyond which we would not accept that. So I think it would be a naive thing to say that, yes, we're optimally tolerant in all circumstances. I don't think that's the case for anybody. We all have different sort of things that we're intolerant towards. And this is where the skill of a conversational curator comes in, which I consider you one of those, Gary, is to be able to have people in a room that may have very different worldviews, even intention at times, but then try and establish where there might be common ground. And there always is one point of common ground, even if that point is there is no other common ground, right? like let's say Sahana and I literally disagree on every single thing. The only thing we would agree on is that we disagree on everything else. So it's almost impossible not to have a common ground. And so what we need to cultivate is this idea of, look, we've got to start on the common ground. We can't start in your position. You can't start in my position. We have to start on where there is a common ground, where we both stand together. And then from there, we can work out whether there's any other steps we can take where we also agree, whilst recognizing that our end destinations may be different, maybe even in tension or in opposition. But I think through that dialogue, positive things can happen, because a great deal of the negative energy that we see online, and the anger and the frustration, all the negative feelings are the same thing. They're just manifestations of fear and insecurity. So anger, hatred, they all stem from the same thing, which is I think it's a fear. And a big part of the fear is the unknown. Like, you don't know where this person's coming from. Therefore, you then fill in the gaps. You create all of the missing information. You just populate that, and then suddenly you have this caricature of this person from which you've denied the humanity of. You've dehumanized the person because basically you've created a cardboard two-dimensional cutout version in order to fill in the knowledge gaps that you have. So if we can take a step and just recognize everyone's a human being, take it from there, no other agenda, just to figure out where else can we share in common. And then that's where the conversation needs to be built upon. That's the foundation of the dialogue. And I think that kind of approach is the way in which we can kind of encourage a polyphonic narrative, where
Yep.
essentially we have a space where lots of different people might be interpreting the world and having a theory about how that looks, without necessarily always being in tension. You can disagree, but not be in contest all the time, right? There could be something that we fundamentally disagree with, but we agree. We can park that. For the course of this 20 minutes of conversation, we're going to talk about this. I think we can all do that. So I think there's a way to do it. It takes skill, it takes maturity, and it also takes habituation. So in other words, we need to get used to having conversations with people that do have different worldviews, which, going back to your point, Gary, where, what we see is that, which is why I don't like safe spaces, quote unquote, because safe space, and I understand I'm speaking from a position of significant privilege, because probably I certainly haven't encountered a traumatic intercession into my safe space in the same way other people might have done. However, the concept of safe space, I think, can very easily segue into a comfort zone, using your terminology, Gary, where we're very comfortable with the same ideas, same people, and that segues very seamlessly into an echo chamber. So that's
Yep.
a continuum, right? Safe space, comfort zone, echo chamber. And I think we end up spending a lot of time in echo chamber. That's where the route to conflict will be, because we end up just convincing ourselves and self-reinforcing the same thing over and over again. And at the point where no additional information is going to change your mind, that's when you are ipso facto closed-minded. And that's where you can be manipulated into conflict.
I totally love what Hung said. It so aligns with, I keep saying this ad nauseum, the pluriversal planet. We don't have to agree. That's the beauty of it. We don't have to be on the same path. We don't have to follow the same narrative. There, there is space and there is need for multiple narratives. And what you're saying is so beautifully expresses that when we get into an echo chamber, what we think of as community is actually just each one echoing the other person. That's not a community. And I'm coming from a place where I've been an enterprise community manager for the large part of my workplace career, and in the early days of Jive and all those platforms when they were just taking off. So the whole intention was to integrate diverse, not integrate, to bring together plural, diverse, distributed voices from across the planet, in a very distributed organization, talking to each other, learning from each other, social learning, peer-to-peer learning, whatever you call it, but not necessarily agreeing, but willingly and respectfully holding space and learning from each other. And that is where I was, I really I loved what you were saying.
I want to just intercede real quick, because
Yeah.
I want to just underline that point. It's to remove the objective of agreement. Because otherwise then it's I'm trying to persuade you, I'm
Yeah.
selling,
Yeah.
I'm trying to force you into the wisdom of
Yeah.
this obvious truth that I alone possess. So it's like, okay, the purpose is simply to exchange
Yes.
that truth. There's no other agenda, and I think that's important to learn. These are difficult things. We're not taught them. As one thing that's very clear is that through education, again, the education system is built to produce workers for the economic system that we've talked about before. There's no coincidence that the education system was implemented at the same time where there was like industrialization and urbanization. If I put a cynic's hat on, I can say, look, the purpose of mass education is actually to free up the parents to do extra work, and also to train the next generation of workers. It's got nothing to do with actually educating the people. But we need to find a way to train and teach ourselves the ability to have these conversations. I know at school I was never formally taught this. I dare say I'm still stumbling. I have to find my own way to figure this out. And the vast majority of people, I don't think, ever get there, particularly in this modern world where it's so easy simply to enter these comfort zones, because it is very nice to have people agree with you all the time. It is. We're very vulnerable in this way, and it's actually really difficult to be challenged. But we need to get better at that. Again, part of the reason why I deeply respect people that hold unpopular opinions and are prepared to articulate them is because they are better than me at being able to deal with contention. And I think that's something I need to get better at. I need to own some of the thoughts, share them more publicly, knowing full well that they may trigger. I hope that's not too much of a triggering word, but to trigger a potential contention. Because I need to get better at that. I think we all need to get better at dealing with stuff we disagree with.
Yeah.
It's so lovely. So something that's really, I feel the need to share this, both Hung and Sahana. Like, there's 3 words that have really struck me in this conversation. One is community, one is intention. Let me stick with them 2 actually. And I'm not particularly good at grammar, right? But I love this whole intention. Like, how do you stay in tension with someone else? Yeah, literally in tension. That challenge, that debate, staying there, not running away from it. And then that community, right? How do you come together to commune, to communicate, despite the fact there may be tension? Like, there's something in language which I don't always pick up on, but for some reason today, I've really picked up on this. Like, if we are going to reimagine, right? If we're going to have a sustainable, thrivable planet longer term, how do we create the conditions that allow us to, design anew, to imagine not just new systems, but new processes, new recruitment tools, new ways of introducing people to a company. So where I want to go back to, if I may, for a second, Sahana's great example, right, Hung? Because I'm the same. I am, without a doubt, if I decide to leave my current employer, I will not get another job. Where I'm at, what I want to be working on, like, you will not be able to squeeze me into a box anywhere. Totally physically impossible, right? So I'm wondering, like, is there something around, you've got high volume recruitment, you've got specialist roles. I'm just wondering, like, is the pace, the speed of work as we know it, is that something that has to change so that we see a more humanized approach to recruitment, development, talent, etc.?
It is already changing, because people are resisting where they can resist that they're doing that. So Sahana is a good example. I'm an example of that. You yourself are as an example of this, like a resistance to be boxed. That's that terminology is very, very clear. Job description is a definition. It's a denial of what other things you can do. It's a list of things that you should focus on. Just pound this out. So what we are seeing is that people that have the opportunity are always setting up their own sort of way of managing their time and their environment. If you study sort of pre-COVID, back in the before times, there was a bunch of studies people were doing about what was good work. And this is, the big consultancies were doing this, and they were interviewing people to understand what good work was. And they were saying things like, look, the worker wants to be able to control their schedule. Worker wants to be able to control their relationships in work. They want to actually control their tools. What kind of things they're actually using to do the job. In an IT sense, this would be saying, hey, I prefer a Windows machine on a Mac. Don't give me the thing. I would want to choose. And if you look at all of those items of good work, you'll find that actually they are very, very similar, almost identical to the work that we used to do in the pre-industrial era, where we had a lot of independent artisans that were producing things where they had full control over environment, full control over usage, full control over relationships, and indeed full control over the people that they would serve. So if you imagine, back in the medieval times, let's say, and by the way, I'm not painting the medieval world as a bountiful world full of endless goodness, but locating it specifically on how work was performed for people with high skills. That person was typically running their own business, control of their own environment, chose their own tools, chose their customers, chose everything. So they had the agency. And the common thread between all of that is this sense of agency. And I think that may be the lowest hanging fruit that we can offer people, is to say, We want you to be able to control these elements and not have them dictated to you. And the companies or the organizational structures that can make best use of this, I think will be very, very attractive for people to end up working with. And we may not have the right terminology to discuss it, because the relationship may no longer be employer-employee. There may be it may be an inadequate way to describe the relationship between the two, because employer is a person that basically acquires the customer, collects the value, and then cascades it down to the employees, who get a percentage of that value in exchange for them performing these sets of tasks. But in a new conception where the individual can choose and has agency as to what they're doing, is the company, quote unquote, still the right organizational structure for this type of work? It sounds like it should more like be a cooperative, perhaps, or it sounds like it should be something on the blockchain, which is a kind of a form of a cooperative in many respects. So yeah, perhaps the entire institution of a company, and therefore the concept of recruitment to a company, those things are kind of creatures of this industrialized era, and perhaps they're the wrong kind of terms and concepts to use for this new future.
Yeah, yeah. So just to what Hung said, especially during COVID, when everyone literally retreated into their homes and wherever else they were working from, those who could. There were frontline people still working outside at risk of their health and lives, but those who could. What I was kind of sensing, talking to different people online, was this little nodes and hubs of people all over the globe, dotted across the planet, coming together, still doing certain shared work, shared project, shared whatever, but they were no longer that's concept of an organization with its structure and building were kind of disintegrating. The rules changed. The business as usual norms underwent a great deal of change in a very short period of time because of what COVID forced us into, the situation. So, whereas working from home would have required some kind of special permission, especially in a kind of a non technological environment or in certain old school traditional organizations, suddenly had to be given, that people had to be allowed because that was the only way to function, the only option available at that point of time. So what I'm kind of trying to sort of say, I think meanderingly, is technology can be used in various ways. We can use it to exacerbate old ills, do the wrong things faster, better, and or like Hung has just described, and I've experienced with platforms like social technology platforms, enterprise platforms, it can be used in a very, very different way, collaboratively, to co-create, to bring together very diverse people from across the planet who would otherwise not be working together side by side in the same office space. So, how do we integrate these different perspectives of technology, and which mindsets? I call these the digital mindsets, which are very different from the traditional mindset that we operate from, where these can lead to certain parallel structures existing even within the old paradigm, perhaps eventually making the old obsolete or almost non existent. Idealistic, yes, which I am, but
It's that switch is going to be tough for a lot of people, I find. So what happens is ultimately I mean, the system that we have currently been in, you have to admire it to a certain degree because it changes in. It's very, very tough to decouple from the system, because it pays us a reward. That reward then is fed into our consumption. The consumption is necessary in order for us to acquire social capital. We want social capital because we want to, we want to have respect. We want to get married. We want to do all of those things. So these things are very difficult to decouple from. And I think that one of the challenges of parallel processing, which is not a criticism, it's just an observation of the challenge, is that to divide the time, it is essentially like riding two horses. And we need to, most people who make the jump from one horse to the other end up jumping back, because the horse they jumped upon basically is unable to produce the mileage required to maintain the lifestyle and the world that they're used to. That's the predominant sort of experience. Big however from all of this, however, is that again, we're leaning on technology. Technology does give us much greater opportunity for us to make that successful switch. So there's an economist in the 1930s, which I'm a big fan of, called Ronald Coase. And he wrote a book called The Nature of the Firm, I think it was. And I think he basically tried to ask the question, like, why is there such a thing as a firm? Like, why do companies even exist? Why are we not just naturally like loads of independent freelancers just collaborating together to deliver this thing? Like, why is there this huge infrastructure, 50,000 people working for this organization? And it is because the acquisition cost of the customer is too hard for an individual to get. There's no brand. So the company acquires the brand. That brand accrues over time, over decades and even centuries, so that it's the obvious business to go to for the bigger and bigger contracts. And one independent is never going to get there. But with technology, it's democratized. And I hate to use that term, but it's kind of distributed, let's say, the opportunity to do brand building to a lot more people. It's distributed the opportunity to discover customers. It's increased the ability to do that, and it's given the individual more chances to succeed and fail. You can set up a company much more easily these days, and trade without needing to be in person. All of these things can unlock opportunity, and we've seen people succeed tremendously well using these new features of tech. So, maybe there's a way to do it. There's certainly winners in that we've already sort of seen, and I would hope that that we'll see more of them with more distribution of more digitalization and distribution.
Do you know something? I'm feeling really, really upbeat now. Hung and Sahana. Do you know something? That joking apart, that's why these conversations for me personally are so important, because, I work in the corporate space day to day, and you don't, again, back to bias, right? My original coming into this conversation on that moment that I hit go live was in a certain space of super corporate. And I'm now going through this 40 minutes and going, okay, that's a helpful lens, but actually this is also happening, which is why diverse dialogue, challenging dialogue is so very important. Because otherwise I could just keep going along going, like, that's how all of the world looks, right? So I just wanted to like name that for myself and challenge my own bias as I came into this conversation 42 minutes ago, because it's the technology lens, as you said, it's a tool, right? It is a tool, and it will do what you want to do with the tool. So how do we use it to the best effect for inclusion, diversity, performance, etc., right? It's a tool.
Every stage of information revolution, and these things were revolutionary. The wars were fought to restrict the distribution of a lot of this technology, has distributed opportunity more widely. So if we go back to the printing press, classic example, in European era, medieval age, the only people that could read were the priests, the clerical class, and actually the lawyers. So the lawyers were emerged because they were the ones that were literate and able then to determine what the king's word was. And everyone else who's illiterate is like, imagine living in a world where you couldn't read the law, and some other agent come in and say, this is the law. Like, you've got no choice. You have to obey. Which is why when the printing press emerged and created a revolution in the church, it sparked the Reformation. That resulted in 30 years war, right? Which to this day per capita, I believe, is one of the top 5 most devastating wars that has ever been fought, just in terms of the numbers of people killed in that period of time. So horrendous, horrific scenario. Yet we can see what emerged from the aftermath of that is an increased distribution of opportunity. More people were literate, more people had more ideas, kind of spurred the Renaissance and all this type of stuff. So I think we're probably at a similar moment now with social media and technology of this type. So a lot of people, Elon Musk right now dominating the headlines with every tweet, and rightly getting criticized for this. However, I think what he's doing and what social media generally has done is kind of do a printing press style big bang. It's enabled anybody to become a publisher and a distributor, and actually enabled sometimes those individuals that have tremendous reach. You look at someone who, the most famous YouTuber on the planet is a guy called Mr. Beast. And he's got a name that completely is the opposite to his purpose and what he does. Because he's by no means beastly. All he does is basically have an enormous audience. He pulls these incredible stunts, and he negotiates these ridiculous discounts from these huge vendors, and he gives them to the people. So people basically benefit tremendously from these stunts that he runs. He's got 200 million subscribers. Now, I would say that one guy, yes, he has a team behind him, but he's still fundamentally one guy, has more power than BBC. In terms of like determining social movements, he has more power than any media broadcaster out there. Certainly more power than any publisher, traditional print publisher, right? Whose reach might be 10,000 at best, 100,000 if you have a bestseller. So one guy with a YouTube account can literally create. Greta Thunberg, classic example. She has become the kind of the exemplar of the environmental movement, just a schoolgirl. But without the distributive power of the internet, she'd just be a schoolgirl still protesting by herself, with no one knowing who she is. So the possibility of huge social change can emerge with these social movements. That can also be negative also. So you look at Donald Trump as an example of that. All kinds of creatures emerging from the depths, right? Depending on your perspective of how it works, social change is occurring through accessing these distributive platforms. And my attitude to all of this is actually an example of a polyphonic world, because the problem we have is that it's a polyphonic world without respect. Because you have people coming on and attempting to dominate the narrative. So even though they're coming in and understanding they have one narrative, they don't respect other narratives. And their objective is to eliminate the all other narratives in order to create a consensus. And a consensus is what we call truth. That's all what truth is, right? It is simply a consensus. And if you look back in history as to what people believed to be true, it was purely because everyone in the room agreed that was the case, right? Everyone agreed at one point the world was flat, or that the sun rotated around the earth. Everyone believed that, and that was true at the time. It was truly believed. So I think what we have to get used to, and this is the real challenge of having a polyphonic attitude, is not only to accept that that argumentation is not the purpose, but to also accept the inaccessibility of the objective truth. Like, no one has access to the objective truth. It's actually logically impossible. When you observe something or you hear something, you're already engaging in an act of interpretation. Like, we know how color this thing here is the background in the thing actually red? You see it as red. Most people do. If you're colorblind, this doesn't look red. It looks kind of gray, right? And actually, red is not a property of this thing. It's simply a light refracting off this wall, this material, and creating red in our eyes. So we've actually created the red in the cones of our eyes. That's how we see it. It doesn't exist in this thing. All this is in material. You had an insect or a bird or some other animal, different set of eyes, they'll see a different color. So Our access to reality is incomplete. It's an active interpretation. Our interpretations are then formed into narratives that help us explain the world in a way that kind of suits our moment. Now, what we've got to do, which is really difficult, is to accept that we can't understand or ever access that objective truth, and still not be paralyzed by that awesome reality, right? Because I think if you see a lot of people that are very insistent that they have access to the truth, these are always ideologues. They could be religious. They could be they usually self-identify in some way. It could be ideological, politically, or could be self-identitarian in whatever way. It's because they're desperate for the comfort of the truth, right? They're desperate not to have to think, because this is definitely true. I can box it. I don't need to think about what's true, right? Truth is a thought killer. Once something is true, you stop thinking about it. So what we have to do is to basically accept we can't access the truth. All we can do is best guess it and keep on improving our guesses. That's our mission. And if we do that, I think we'll head towards the right direction. We'll have much better relationships, much better conversations. We'll be far less insistent, much more receptive.
So, Mr. Hung Lee, mic drop moment. I can't believe it. It's thank you for that, mate. That was really, really powerful. Actually, we're on 51 minutes, which is what always happens when we get together. I'm going to draw us to a checkout round just to respect each other's time and those that are either watching it live or watch it back. Start with yourself, Sahana, then go to Hung, then come to myself. Just what's something that maybe you've been triggered in your mind you're going to explore more following this conversation? Maybe you've been reminded of something. What are you taking away from this exploration today? That would be wonderful. Cheers, Sahana.
Yeah, I loved what Hung said, and kind of encapsulated the whole conversation just now about living in a polyphonic world. There is no singular truth, and the whole problem today is we are running a narrative which is acting as the single truth, and because of that one monoculture, call it what you will, a monomyth, we are sort of running into these obstacles where the myth and the reality clashes. Because again, we are driven by this, but that's what we have to do, but this is what is the reality. So if we accept, which is very difficult, like Hung said, that multiple realities exist, reality is not an objective thing out there. It is how we interpret with our own experiences, biases, prejudices, with who we are from our inner being, that reality becomes for us what it is not for someone else. Only when we respect each other's realities and truths and hear it can we truly exist in a polyphonic, diverse, pluriversal world that it is, and not give in to one homogeneous narrative trying to run the entire show in a certain way. And then we can realize the potential of of humanity, of technology in all its various. We'll make misses, we'll have errors, we'll make mistakes, but if we hold it that different people are coming with different perspectives, each to be respected, even if we violently disagree, and see where that not only commonality but where that disagreement also takes us, maybe on different paths, but but as long as we are respectfully disagreeing and respectfully holding that polyphonic truth, and not hankering for an echo chamber of conformity and comfort, I think we'll be on a good path with technology and on this planet, and diverse epistemologies that exist. Thank you.
You want me to say something, Gary? Okay, so I would say, for some reason, I just got sort of Louis Theroux just floated into my mind, it's relevant for this conversation, because if you observe his conversations, particularly his Weird Weekend series, I don't know whether anyone's seen this, but he makes a point basically of interacting with marginalized groups. Oftentimes groups that have actively hostile political and religious positions to something that he might represent. But he's somehow able to have conversations with these people, and you can see there's a conversation that's based on amity and respect, even though the ideological viewpoints are extraordinarily bitter to absorb. And I just think we can learn a lot from how Louis Theroux does interviews or has conversations with people with observational views. And it's generally a couple of rules that I'm going to try and experiment with myself now that I'm talking about it. Number one, never volunteer your opinion. Like, your opinion is not relevant. You know your opinion, so why do you need to articulate that? You're interested in that person, so okay, let's hear what this person's got to say. Then ask that person how they came to that conclusion. You know, what you hate this or you love that? Okay, do you know? Can I ask how you came to feel that way? And then that's the conversation that emerges. And what seems to happen is that the people who are asked those questions then need to go inside and then truly, authentically come out. And that may be the first time that anybody's ever asked them that, and they're able to feel heard. You know, they're able to understand, actually, someone's trying to understand my position. And through that sort of emergence, that early start, good conversations seem to occur, and you can see strength of relationships start to be built. So I think some basic techniques could be applied. So aside from, you know, a lot of the big abstract stuff we've been talking about today, of which I've, you know, been guilty of it as anybody, but there's some basic conversational techniques. I think if we teach ourselves that and teach other people these techniques, we'll go to a better place.
Thanks, Hung. For me, what's just really come up so powerfully, you use that word emergence again, and it's that this conversation's really reinforced to me that this is possible, like way more often than we believe it is. You know, like the conditioning that I have as Gary is that, you know, more, faster, harder, back to that single narrative of productivity. And it's like, how much more can come out of intentionally engaging in more dialogues like this more often? I'm not saying you're going to live there, because you've got to get stuff done, but I just feel that richness of having an intentionally diverse network of people, you know, maybe within the work setting and outside, can only enrich. And I think, you know, this has modeled that for me today. Like, if I was just talking to another two people that believe what I think or just work in my industry, it would be a very, very, very different dialogue. So I just want to thank you both for that. Thank you, everybody, for joining, watching back. Do check out these two awesome humans. First of all, Hung's brilliant Recruiting Brain Food, which is now on Substack.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to talk about that for a quick minute before we go.
It's thank you, Gary. It's simple. I had to move it as a contingency against Musk potentially blowing it up. So yeah, it's now recruitingbrainfood.substack.com. It's basically a curated newsletter once a week in your inbox. 10 articles that are going to help you think a little bit more enthusiastically about the world, I hope. So yeah, sign up for that and you get it once a week.
Perfect. And Sahana, do follow Shahana's details on the bottom. And if you want to follow some of me and my wild writing, you can find me on Medium at Gary Turner. Well, Gary Thinking Partner, actually. I don't know what my own handle is. So thanks, Hung. Thanks, Sahana. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you whenever we come back. Take care.